I was quite surprised to learn about a lawsuit against Gateway Church that includes a civil RICO count. Now, if you guys have heard about Robert Morris, I'm sure you have. I'm not the only one talking about him. Since July of 2024, it's kind of blown up. At that time, Cindy Clemenshire came out publicly, and then Robert Morris from Gateway Church stepped down as the lead pastor. I believe he had been the pastor there for over 20 years. And since then, he has not only been charged with a crime, criminal charges that involved Cindy Clemenshire that have now been disposed of because, as you know, he recently pled guilty to those. But there have also been 2 lawsuits filed against Gateway and Robert Morris and others. There's 2 separate lawsuits. So I'm going to be talking to you today about the class action lawsuit that contains a RICO, a civil RICO count. So don't conflate this with the civil lawsuit that Cindy Clemenshire has filed against Robert Morris and others in the church. There's a bunch of defendants that are listed there. That is a separate one. And just so that we are clear on what we're talking about today, that other lawsuit involves Cindy Clemenshire and her father, and it's against Gateway and others, and essentially they are alleging defamation, because that's on the basis that she was referred to by all of these people at Gateway, including Robert Morris and others who knew what happened, as a young lady, rather than the child that she was. And they covered it up. And the allegations in there included that they did so because they wanted to advance their business. And I'm not quite sure if I went over that case specifically on my channel, but I did with Everett on his channel, Ohio for Freedom. And I remember that when we were talking about it, I brought up RICO, civil RICO. And I said, wow, this sounds like there could be a civil RICO. However, that is a state lawsuit, meaning it is filed in the state of Texas. So it's not. And the defendants, I believe that they're all in Texas. So that would likely explain it. Could that change at some point? Could there be, an update, so to speak, of that lawsuit? Could be, but I don't know anything about any other changes to that lawsuit, and I'm not speaking specifically about it. But we're talking about RICO today, okay? So there is a different lawsuit. It was originally filed in October of 2024, and it's a class action. So there's several named plaintiffs. They're bringing the lawsuit, and they're bringing it against Gateway Church, Robert Morris, and several others. So let's get into what this is about. It is a 4-count lawsuit. So the 4th count is the civil RICO. What is RICO? Well, in a criminal context, it's called the Racketeering, Influence, Corrupt Organizations Act, and it started out to combat organized crime, essentially the mafia, and it was used in that context in the criminal prosecution of the mafia, and then it extended into businesses, insurance fraud, healthcare fraud, anything where it was asserted that there's corruption, essentially. Okay, and that is a criminal statute, but there's a civil statute, but it's federal. So in this class action that was filed against Robert Morris, Gateway Church, it's in federal court, but it is in Texas. And I'm going to go through the newest complaint, and that was recently filed last week. It was filed October 13th. So yeah, last week, October 13, 2025. Remember, I said there was an original one that was filed in October of 2024. So there's a new one that was filed because it now includes that RICO charge. So what What does RICO offer or allow the plaintiffs to get? Well, it allows them to get their attorney's fees paid because, you know, these plaintiffs, they're paying their attorneys hourly fees. It costs money to go to trial. It would allow for injunctive relief, meaning they're trying to get somebody to do something or stop doing something. And most importantly, with the money part of it, which is the damages, they could potentially get 3 times of what they're asking. So let's talk about it. All right. So first off, the lawsuit names Gateway Church, Robert Morris, and Steve Doolin. Those are the defendants. I looked up everybody that's representing these parties, and interestingly, there are so many attorneys on this case. I mean, there's 5 attorneys that represent the plaintiffs, and there are 8 attorneys that represent Gateway Church, and there are 6 attorneys just for Robert Morris, and no attorneys for Steve Doolin. So he's probably going to have to get a lawyer at some point. So this amendment, or this, it's called the second amended complaint. It's a class action complaint, and it has 4 counts against these defendants. So they talk about factually, you know, they talk about Gateway. It's one of the largest churches in the United States. They have past membership exceeding 100,000 congregants. I'm going to need my glasses for this. All right. And they've got class members that are from different states throughout the United States. And that's what brings them into a federal lawsuit. If this was just Texas, they would not likely be able to invoke jurisdiction of the federal court. Also, they assert that the damages exceed $5 million. So, remember I've told you, if you've watched me and I'm talking about complaints, some of the best complaints, it feels like I have hair in my eyes, they read like a story. You know, they have a factual portion, they break it down, and this one is well written, but I'll have to say, because I've read a lot of these pleadings on this case, and the motion to dismiss that was originally filed, that was very well written as well by the attorneys for Gateway and Robert Morris. But let's go through this. So the lawsuit, they say, this is the plaintiff's complaint. They say this lawsuit is about transparency and promises brought by members whose concern is not money in their pockets, but rather exposing fraudulent stewardship. Then senior pastor Robert Morris and Gateway leaders represented that 15% of all tithe dollars would be distributed to global missions and Jewish ministry partners. And they encouraged the church members to give those tithes generously and assured them that is where they were going to go. So the plaintiffs allege that Gateway Church and their leaders engaged in misrepresentation, fraud, and breach of contract in their efforts to induce, to get the plaintiffs and other church members to donate money to Gateway. They assert that the defendants did not use 15% of those tithes that they collected for those intended purposes, for the purposes that they told the church members they were going to use it for. And that the intended purposes were represented by Robert Morris and by Gateway leaders, which is likely why there's another individual included there. And then the plaintiffs state that they attempted to seek transparency and proof that the money did in fact go to the global missions and the Jewish ministry partners. But they were rebuffed. Essentially, they were shooed away by Gateway Church. They asked if they could see the ledgers, the financial documents, anything, any transparency to allow them to see where their tithes went to, because they are saying that they gave those tithes based upon those representations made, meaning they wanted it to go to those ministries. They also assert, the plaintiffs assert, that the church, Gateway Church, and Morris specifically, used a marketing scheme to guarantee congregants a return of their money if the congregants wanted such a return. And if you've heard about it, meaning the money back guarantee. However, when the congregants asked the church to make good on that promise, the church refused. In response to the request for the return of the tithes, Gateway's attorney, Wendy Hodges, recently responded, quote, "Once donations are made, they constitute a completed, unconditional gift to the church and become the property of the church," end quote. Now, there's a lot, this is very long. It's a very long document. It's 20 pages. I'm not going to go through word for word, but I'm trying to just give you a summary of it, the pertinent points, and I want to make a comment here about that statement. Because if that's the case, you would think that what I'm referring to is their attorney's statement. If that was the case, that once the donations are made, it's an unconditional gift, why would representatives, leaders of Gateway, to include Robert Morris, tell the congregation that if they were disenfranchised or dissatisfied with what their tithes were doing, that they could ask for them back? Why even say that? So this is the issue. They are asserting that the tithes didn't go where they said they were going to go. And when they asked for their tithes back, because they were told that they could at any time, that they didn't make good on it. So they're rebuked. They are really just rebuffed at any attempt to try to find out the transparency. Where did those tithes go? And they have every right to do so, right? Now, churches are not required to show their books to the government, right? But when you have a situation where, as in here, they are asserting that it's a breach of contract, it's fraud, and you can have a contract verbally. You can tell somebody, I agree to do this if you give me this, and it can be verbal. A lot of people think that, well, you didn't have it in writing. Well, that's not necessarily unenforceable just because it was spoken. And so likewise here, they're claiming it's a breach of contract and that there was fraud, that there was misrepresentations made. So throughout this complaint, they talk about there's the CPA, which I think is very important. So to oversee the operations of Gateway Global Ministries, Gateway hired a seasoned CPA. He was a then partner at a well-known international accounting firm. This CPA, I don't know if it's a male or female, his or her name is not mentioned in here. So the CPA was told that Gateway could really, his heart, it's a he, his heart, they could really use his heart for missions to oversee with integrity the more than $10 million per year that Gateway was allegedly giving away. So this CPA joined the church as executive pastor of Global Ministries in July of 2011, but not as an accountant, which I thought was strange. So he supervised 6 associate pastors and was in charge of vetting and approving relationships with the gifts to the ministry and partners all around the world. And each month, this CPA would receive a financial statement for the Global Ministries Fund, which reflected increases, 15% of the tithe, and outflow, the salaries, administrative costs, and overhead approved gifts to ministries. And at the end of the year, the CPA and his administrative assistant would review the transactions for the year. When the CPA first began working for Gateway, its annual revenue was in the $100 million range. And it rose to about $120 million in 2014. But during the CPA's tenure, and he was there between 2011 and 2014, in his executive pastoral role, he never observed the Global Ministries Fund to give away more than $3 million in 1 year. So the argument is by the plaintiffs, they are getting at least $100 million a year. You're inducing us to give you tithes because you're saying it's going to go to these ministries, these outreaches, 15% of it. So that would mean 15 million. But instead, the CPA sees only no more than 3 million is given away. So, in spite of that, Robert Morris and other leaders at Gateway, including defendants, and there were other defendants that were listed, but they are no longer part of the case. Thomas Lane, Kevin Grove, and Steve Doolin misled the congregation during Global Impact Weekend each year by stating that the full amount was being given to missions when in fact it was not. So their Global Impact Weekend, that's their drive, their money drive, right? Those telethons. We just saw it with Daystar, Joni Lamb, and they had, they brought in Joseph Z to come in and solicit to get those funds. This is what these big churches do to get money. Now, it would be great, and we wouldn't be here right now if they were actually doing what they said they were going to do with the money. But yet here we are, time after time. People are calling them out, and it's the right thing to do, right? You want to hold these ministries, these people accountable when they're lying. And that is what the basis of this lawsuit is. They're saying, hey, these people lied. That's a breach of contract. We want our money back, and we have damages. So that's what the basis of the lawsuit is. All right, so then a member of the global staff detected discrepancies in the reconciliation of Gateway's Global Ministries fund balance. Noticeably, there were several entries amounting to more than 1 million that were unaccounted for. The CPA asked Randy Bell, Gateway's chief financial officer, CFO, about the issue. And Bell said he did not know what the entries represented, but that they were elder approved. The CPA then asked which elders approved them, but Randy Bell didn't know. He said that it came from Kevin Grove. And at the time of the original filing of the complaint in October 2024, Kevin Grove was listed as a defendant, but he's no longer listed. So the financial irregularities observed by the CPA, let me see, was Kevin Grove on here? Yes, he was. I just wanted to make sure I didn't say that wrong. He was on the original one, but not on the one that I'm talking about today, the new one. All right, so Grove was an executive global pastor, and the financial irregularities that were observed by the CPA occurred outside the scope and purview of any external accounting reports, and they escaped external scrutiny. Based on information and belief, no financial auditing was done by an outside accounting firm during this period of time related to the global ministry donations. So the CPA scheduled a meeting with Kevin Grove the following day and approached him with these issues. And Grove became visibly enraged and with a raised voice instructed the CPA to quit reconciling the accounts. Around the same time, the CPA began to find similar unexplained entries. So then the CPA went to Tom Lane. Tom Lane was on the original lawsuit, but he's not on this one. And he went to Tom Lane and told him that he couldn't be a part of the financial irregularities and that it needed to be addressed or else he would resign. So Tom Lane told the CPA that he would take it up with Robert Morris, who was then the pastor at that time. A few days later, Tom came back and told the CPA, quote, I spoke to Robert over the weekend and we agreed to accept your resignation, end quote. So, what does that look like? This is quoted in this lawsuit. So somebody has found these irregularities, financial irregularities. They're the CPA. And they bring it to two different people. One person raises his voice and tells him to stop doing what he's been hired to do. And then the second one, he goes to him and he's like, I'm having a hard time. I might have to resign because I can't reconcile this. I'm being told not to. Asking for some help. And then, we'll just accept your resignation. What does that look like? It's sweeping it under the rug. It's covering it up. It's not taking account. It's not taking responsibility. Not being transparent whatsoever. Instead, you can go on your way. We see this in regular life, right? But you don't expect to see this in the church. And that's the problem. So, in the CPA's exit interview, because he had one, Tom Lane told him about the fraud against Gateway that occurred when the organization called the West Africa Initiative defrauded the church in the amount of $750,000. So interestingly, the CPA is in this exit interview and Tom Lane tells him about this defrauding allegation. So the CPA researched this and found that several Gateway leaders, including Kevin Grove, Ernest Reed Grafke, and Peter Hirsch, may have been on the board of the WAI, which is the West African Initiative, board of directors. And if an audit had been truly performed, it may have uncovered Gateway's engagement with the WAI for supposed ministry project. So that's interesting because there's some intertwining here. It doesn't go on, but I found that to be very interesting. It just leaves it there. But in any event, following the turmoil and disappointment in the church following Morris's resignation because of those allegations that came out in the summer of 2024, the current members sought transparency regarding the use of tithing money. So that's interesting. So they're saying that, they're asserting that because of what happened when the allegations came out regarding Cindy Clemenshire in the summer of 2024, well, the members kind of perked up, right? And then they started to question the transparency and the use of their tithing. It doesn't say exactly how or why, but somebody must have leaked something, right? Because you've got these statements before that talking about what the CPA knew, and then he resigns. Perhaps these people came forward, got together, whatever, and then they figured it out. They're putting the puzzle pieces together. Something's not quite right. And that's where it is. That's where this began. And if you look at any of these responses, this lawsuit, anything that I cover, the allegation is that these are disgruntled congregants or disgruntled ex-congregants. And I talked about that recently in a video that I'm covering about the David E. Taylor cult. That's exactly what the defense attorney was calling the victims and the whistleblowers, that they're disgruntled. Hey, they're just angry. And we hear that a lot. When you're in a church, right? Because this is exposure going on, it's not going to stop. And I used to hear that a lot, before the whole Mike Bickle exposure, because that kind of did it for me, where I was completely floored with what happened, but I believed it right away. But before that, in my life, I would think that about people. Oh, you're just disgruntled. You're just, maybe offended. Without really knowing more, I would think that. Well, when you dig deep and you figure out that's not really what's going on, people aren't just, all these people are not just disgruntled. They have legitimate issues. And if you're in a church where you have church members or pastors telling you that we are asking for this amount of funds. Let's take, for instance, because this happens a lot, and we saw it with Faith Life Church. They take up a tithe because they have a project. They have a building or another ministry, whatever it is. They have a building they want to build. Very easy in the context of a building, right? Because it's either going to be built or it's not. In Faith Life Church, we heard Ruth, because she worked in, I think it was the finance department. Ruth, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I just spoke with her last week, and you know, it's hard to remember all this stuff. But in any event, she was on Laura Lynn's show quite some time ago, and she talked about the finances. But there was a project that Faith Life Church was contending that they were initiating, which was the Journey Project. I think it was a building. And if I am stating it wrong, somebody tell me, but I believe that's what it was. But I don't believe that it was ever even built. So now we have this lawsuit, right? Which is alleging RICO. This could potentially open the floodgates for lawsuits against other churches. Not that they couldn't before, but the thing is that some people just don't realize what's going on. Do I have a lawsuit? Should I start whatever? You know, and I'm not saying at all that everybody should go out and seek a lawsuit, but people need to be held accountable. Churches need to be held accountable. If your church is saying that they're receiving the money, they're inducing you, they're asking you for money, asking for tithes for a specific project, and it's not done, you have every right to go ask, hey, you know, I donated to this. So what's the status? Where are you in the process of this? Do you have an outline? Do you have deadlines? Do you have a proposal? What do you have? You should be able to ask that. And you shouldn't be treated like Nathan Apfel was treated. If you watch The Religion Business, he went to a ministry where he tithed, and he asked if he could see where those donations were going to. And he was treated like a criminal. He was zip tied, handcuffed, whatever one it was, detained, and he was escorted off the property. I'm not quite sure if he was actually criminally trespassed, but that's what we're seeing, and that's not normal, and that's not okay. So my point is, could we see more lawsuits like this? Because people from the pulpits all over the country, we're going to see it every day, every week, every hour, right? They're doing it from the pulpit. They're doing it by electronic mailings. That's the wire fraud, electronic fraud, the wire fraud, the mail fraud. And that is a component of that will get you into RICO. And if there are 2 or more acts to engage in this pattern of activity, this racketeering activity, which could be bribery, it could be extortion, it could be the wire fraud, it could be a whole bunch of things in this civil action. And it extends beyond one state. Well, if you are a ministry and you have a reach outside of your state, guess what? This could be you next. This could be Faith Life Church next. Just based upon what I know about that Journey Project. They collected funds and they did not build the building. Are there other churches out there that are doing this? They're collecting funds for a specific reason. They could be next. So let me know your thoughts about that. I wanted to share this with you, and let me just tell you what happens next. So the defendants will have some time to file their motion to dismiss. They always do that. They did it with the first one. They'll do it with this one. But they wanted, and they asked for extra time, and the plaintiffs did not object to that because there is this new RICO allegation. And then as long as the court, the federal court judge, dismisses or denies that motion by the defendants, this case advances to trial. There will be deadlines that the judge will impose where each party has to provide discovery, evidence that they intend on using at a trial. A lot of times these cases get resolved by a settlement. And I was recently on a friend's podcast. It's Full Armor Media Group is the name of their podcast on YouTube. I was on there last night and we were talking about this. So go check them out. It's called Full Armor Media Podcast, Spiritual Insurgency. I couldn't remember it the other night. I don't know why, but my friends Jason and Aaron, they interviewed me last night. I will link that video here, and we talked about this. I was answering their questions, and essentially they were asking me whether there could be criminal charges. There could be. I mean, anything is possible. Think about it like this. This is what we say in the legal world, because as lawyers, we know this. Anybody can essentially sue anybody, right? They can sue anybody. But you still have to get through the scrutiny of the substance of your complaint if it's a civil suit. Meaning, if they don't have a basis, or the judge doesn't have jurisdiction to hear it, it could get dismissed, thrown out of court, right? But here, there was a dismissal before. We already saw that last year. I mean, I didn't report on it because I wasn't following this last year. And so I am now. And so they were able to get beyond that motion, and then they're left standing. Now, that was on 2 counts, the breach of contract, the fraud and misrepresentation. Even if they don't have RICO, even if say perhaps, I'm not saying what's going to happen, I'm just saying hypothetically, even if they don't have that RICO count, they still have the first 2 counts, which is the breach of contract and the fraud and the inducement. So we're going to watch and see what happens. And in the meantime, going back to what I was referring to in the beginning, that lawsuit that Cindy and her father have against Robert Morris and many others, that's slated for jury trial in June of 2026. So I anticipate they'll probably settle, but you never know. You just never know. Nothing's ever written in stone, and you just never know what can happen. Curveballs are thrown all the time. I'm still watching the docket on the Tom Cassie, the Ohio versus Tom Cassie criminal case. That is going to trial in less than 4 weeks. There was just a filing the other day, and it was just additional discovery was handed over to the defense attorney. I have not seen any motions filed by the defense in that case to date of substance, like anything like, another motion to continue, other than the one that was originally, I think it was just an oral motion. Originally it was slated for a jury trial in July, but now then it was moved to November 18th. And it is still scheduled for November 18th unless something else happens. So we shall see. I am also working on a video. I'm going to be talking about Jeremiah Johnson. I talked about it at the Righteous Reformation gathering in Atlanta, but unfortunately that part didn't get televised on the live stream. So I will be working on it, and I'm going to do an update on there because I see that he has another video. And just to let you know, if you've seen it, he did a video where people were thinking that he was on the side of podcasters. He's clearly not. So when I first watched that video, I thought, oh, that's helpful that he's mentioning the podcasters, talking about all this corruption and all this cover-up and that's going on. But no, he makes his digs against the podcasters. And so I want to talk about that. I also have somebody that I'm going to be interviewing this coming Saturday, and he is a pastor and he's located in California. And I spoke with him a couple days ago because he has personal knowledge of the David E. Taylor cult. He went and he wasn't part of the ministry, but he has a story to tell, and I want him to tell it. But he does have personal information, and please tune in for that, because that's going to be this Saturday, which is the 26th, I think, or 25th. I don't know my days. Yes, today's the 23rd. So yes, 2 days from now would be the 25th. Okay. So let me know if you have any questions about this, because it will help me to formulate the next video, because once there's an update on this, I'll talk about that, because what we'll see next come up is going to be the motion to dismiss, and then we'll see what the judge does. And we'll see if the RICO count, it's a count in civil court, it's charge in criminal, if that is sustained or if the judge strikes it. We'll see, and I'll let you know. All right, look forward to hearing from you in the comments.